Hi, this is Pete Lyons with Let's Play Salesforce, and today we're doing Einstein Analytics SAQL Basics, the Coalesce function. What is Coalesce? Coalesce is a function that will return the first non-null values. So, for example, right now I've just got a simple values table. This is off the standard Sales Analytics opportunity dataset that is created by the Sales Analytics app in my Trailhead dataset, or in my Trailhead developer org. And if we switch over to SAQL mode, we can see that this looks a lot like the other queries that we've seen before. There's no grouping and there's no aggregation. We're just doing a generate statement because we're getting one row per row, so there's no flattening of the data. And what I want to call your attention to is that billing state and province in many cases is null. So what a Coalesce will do is it is a function that takes two arguments. First, where are we checking for nulls? And second, if a null is returned, what do we want to do? So, Coalesce, my account billing state, comma, unknown. So this will basically say generate the account's billing state, and if I don't have that, give me the word unknown instead in my account billing state column. So if I go ahead and run that, we can now see that unknown is getting populated over all of those. We can also use this for field of preference logic. So for example, if my contact has home underscore address underscore state double underscore C, and I want to grab that instead, I can pass in a different field instead of the word unknown. You can also pass multiple arguments into Coalesce, so it says first check this thing over here, then check that thing over there, and then if you still don't find anything, give me a unknown value. So it can take two or more arguments. I've never actually tried to see just how far you can push it. But where else is this going to be really useful? So some of you may recognize this visualization from my Binding Basics Part 2 dynamic measures. And I've actually disconnected the dynamic measure on this. So we just have a simple grouping toggle here. Now, what if I didn't want to have a default selection, but I still wanted to have a default selection? Like, for example, I've got this set to single required. But what would happen if I set this to, just single selection only? Well, a selection is no longer required. So I can deselect, which is going to result in a null grouping. It's not going to be able to read the property index of null. And what we're going to have to do is go to our binding and add a Coalesce to the binding. Now, in this case, the syntax is pretty particular about where you're putting things. It wants you to do the Coalesce on the input, so not including the serialization. So I got to put everything up until .as object. That's my data input. This is what I need to enclose in my Coalesce. So I'm going to go COALESCE, and then all the way down here, that's where I need my closing parentheses. And I'm going to need to pass in a default value. So I'm going to say that if nothing is returned from my binding, I want you to override that null with industry. Let's see if that works. So now when nothing is selected, I'm grouping by industry. And you might recall from this example, I had relabeled vertical as industry. So that's another really handy use of Coalesce. This is very important when doing conditional color binding. For example, when my number is this big, give me a red. When my number is this big, give me a yellow. When my number is this big, give me a green. And you're using a SAQL statement to do that. You need to make sure to include a Coalesce because there are a lot of things that can happen if you attempt to pass null to the color on a widget. It won't necessarily look like it's breaking, but certain things will start breaking down, such as pages won't function correctly. So you want to make sure that you're always using a Coalesce. If you're ever thinking that maybe a null might be returned, you want to know, you want to be able to tell the system how to accommodate that null. Another good example of what you can do with Coalesce is to determine what a default value is for dynamic text when you're looking at something that the user does to generate a text string. So for example, this is actually a simple dashboard that demonstrates that bindings are returned in the order in which they are received. So for example, the goal here is press 3, 2, 1 in order to win. So if I go 1, 2, 3, that's what the binding returns right here is 1, 2, 3. And then I can dynamically say something like 1, 2, 3 is not the same as 3, 2, 1. And this part where it says the binding returns null, that's done through using Coalesce right on where we are embedding this as the text body on our widget. So if I do hit 3, 2, 1 though, now I can click here for my prize. Oh, I guess it's over here now. And oh, last time. Oh, can I get a prize? Can I get a prize? Yay, I got a prize. If anybody's interested in the code for that dashboard, please reach out and I'll be more than happy to help. So another way that you're going to be able to put Coalesce to use is by getting around the fact that when you group by a dimension, any rows that have null in that dimension are going to be dropped and are not going to be displayed in your table. It's not like there's a toggle somewhere where you can say like show or hide null. They're just not there. So, you know, a lot of times you might want to keep this. Other times you might want to expose it. And if you're going to want to have that option to do either or, you're going to want to use Coalesce, especially if most of the time you don't want to see your nulls. Other options are going to be overriding that value within the data flow. But let's take a look at the opportunity data set that we looked at earlier. Now, we know that in table mode, if I show the billing state, that any of those nulls are still going to show up as nulls because we are grouping by all. We are not grouping, or well, we're not grouping at all, and we're certainly not grouping by billing state or province. But now if I'm to group by that in, you know, a query that's intended for a chart, and I go to billing state, we'll sort descending. I don't have any values over, you know, a dozen or so. Where are my other, like, you know, 200-300 opportunities that don't have a state? I would expect this to actually be the largest value, and it's simply getting dropped. So now if we did what we did before, or if we do exactly the same thing as before, and we coalesce the billing state, and when it's null, we say give me an NA, is this going to work? No, it's not. And let's take a look at why. So in this, you know, we don't have that big NA row that I would have expected to see at the top. And the reason for this is because it happened after we grouped. Now, since we had already performed that grouping and already flattened to one row per state, we've already dropped our nulls at this point. So how do we achieve this then? We're actually going to need to regroup after our initial projection and then regenerate. Because if we just run right now, there's an invalid token of count because anything that, you know, these aggregations that we did, they were after the original grouping. Now that we've grouped again, all bets are off. We have to redo our grouping. So now, don't need the coalesce this time because we've already replaced that value. We do just need to project again. So remember, always reproject after you regroup. Anytime you do a grouping, it must be followed by a projection or you're not going to see any data. So now we'll switch back to table mode, and there, this is the truth. It's not that, you know, Missouri had the majority of rows at 13. It's really that 402 rows in this data set simply don't have an account billing state. So another place that you're going to use the Coalesce a lot, and it's not SAQL based, is going to be in your compare table. So for example, let's say that I add another column to this, and I edit that column. In my formula here, it does give a simple example of what I might want to do here, but what if this results in a divide by zero error? Or if I multiply something by, you know, if I do something that makes the system angry and I'm trying to do math on something that's null, and I need to get around that return. Well, for example, if I just do a over 0, we see that divide by 0 error results in us getting a null instead. So I could very simply do this, and we'll say, give me a 999 instead. So that divide by 0 gives us a 999. Depending on your use case, maybe you're going to want to see a 0. Maybe you're going to want to see a 1. But being able to have that if all else fails functionality provided by Coalesce is really, really, really important for making sure that not only does your dashboard do what it's supposed to do 90% of that time, but that other 10%, you're not just popping error messages because you didn't cross your T's and dot your I's. It's a really important step for not only ensuring that your dashboards aren't going to break down on some use case that you did not anticipate, but also just a really nice finishing touch to make sure that your work is clean and tight under the hood. So that's all I have for today. In short, the Coalesce function is extremely simple, but also extremely powerful, versatile, and useful. And you should definitely consider including it in your arsenal of daily tricks that you use, whether you're sticking to the UI and using compare tables, doing simple or complex bindings, or writing long, complicated, ridiculous SAQL to solve world hunger. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. So please remember to like, subscribe, tell a friend, and as always, thanks for watching.